Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. We're going to start momentarily here. Just give us a minute. Okay. Hope everyone can see my screen. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today, we're going to go over the Google Analytics Power webinar. Part of the series is covering best practices on configuration and reporting. Joining me today, Eric Fettman, eNoor Analytics coach and trainer. A little bit about us for those of you who did not join previous sessions. We started in 2003 in Silicon Valley, and we fell in love with data analytics. We became a certified partner with Google Analytics and later became an authorized reseller for Google Analytics Premium. Our co-founder, Firas, is he's part of the Digital Analytics Association, specifically the San Francisco chapter. Our footprint in the world, we have offices throughout the United States, in Europe, and in the Middle East, in Dubai. Our team also spans throughout different locations. We're very global. Part of what we do is specializing, again, we're a marketing optimization firm, and we specialize in web mobile analytics. We also do social analytics, social media analytics. So we monitor the social media and turn unstructured data into structured ones, if you will. And we also help with qualitative analytics. So we measure the voice of the customer and surveys as well. We do A/B testings as well for websites. Here's some of the clients we have globally. Again, something a lot of the brands you recognize: governments, different B2B businesses, hospitality, education sector, retailers. Some of our MENA clients, including, for example, Government of Qatar, NBC Group, MR. Some of the tools we have, and more you can learn more about it in our website, but most maybe notable one is Campaign Analyzer, which can help you organize your tags for the URLs and to manage your campaigns for Google Analytics. Google Analytics book. This book is available on Amazon for pre-order. The authors are Eric Fettman, our trainer again, and co-authored by Firas and Shiraz. Just a little more housekeeping item before we begin. We got training coming up in Riyadh, in Saudi, in March, and another one in Dubai, along with the normal US cities trainings. You can learn more about it if you go to enoor.com/training. If you have any questions during the session, please type your question. We can take questions at the appropriate time. If you don't have any if you don't get a chance to check them during the session, we will definitely allocate some time towards the end of the session to take your questions. And again, you have two ways to ask a question. You can either type it, or you can raise your hand, and we will provide the mic for you to ask your question live. Any questions you got, you can email me after the session at abdullah@enoor.com, or you can reach our training at enoor.com. With that being said, I'm going to turn the mic to Eric to get started. So just give me a second here. Okay, Eric.
Thank you very much, Abdullah, and thank you everyone for joining today. This is the fourth in our Google Analytics Power Webinar series, as we are calling them, and today is best practices for Google Analytics configuration and reporting. And as the name suggests, it sounds like we're going to talk about a lot of different things today, and we are. So we aren't going to go too deeply into any one topic today, but we are going to be discussing a bunch of different best practices, all important, all different, either on the implementation end, the configuration end, or the ongoing reporting end. And then we will look at a big bonus best practice that really stands on its own, and that's just as a little preview of that. That's about Google Tag Manager. But we will go through 7 best practices pretty quickly. We'll talk briefly about Google Tag Manager. If we have time at the end of the webinar, we'll go into some of the topics more deeply, and we'll certainly answer any specific questions that come up during Q&A. And also, you may notice some of the points we covered in one or two of the previous webinars, so we're reiterating some of the essential topics that we are covering in the other webinars, either previously or coming up as well in the webinar series. So with that said, let's just consider something about Google Analytics worldwide. There are actually this number 10 million to 25 million. It's probably actually pretty conservative. There are numbers that we've seen lately that indicate maybe closer to 30 million installations of Google Analytics worldwide. This is Fortune 500. You see that the percentage Fortune 500, I think this is US based, is 67% of Fortune 500 companies have Google Analytics installed. So just as an indicator of one country, and there are similar trends worldwide in terms of the prevalence of Google Analytics. And this is a little bit of a pie chart. This is Eric's made up pie chart. This is 70 of everyone who's using Google Analytics, 77% are in so-called Google Analytics purgatory, and that you have it installed, you may be looking at the reporting, but you realize that there may be gaps in the reporting. You may not be really using the functionality to its fullest extent. And then there are, a certain percentage of folks, in 20% of the installations, people think that they're doing everything correctly. I don't think anyone on the webinar is in that category where you're thinking that you have all of the implementation correct, all the reporting correct, and there's nothing else that you need to do differently. If you were in that category, you wouldn't be on the webinar with us today. So glad that you're here. And there, all of the installations, they're probably 3%, or even fewer. 3% is probably generous. They're probably 3% of Google Analytics installation and reporting practices where all the main points, all the main best practices are really addressed. So the point today is to try to get all of us closer to that 3% of installations where the best practices are really being met, both in terms of implementation and configuration and reporting on an ongoing basis. We know we're not doing it right, but someday. So we want to get to confidence. We want to get to the point where we are confident in the data, where the implementation is providing the data that we need, and our reporting is also giving us the insight that we need, and we're confident in the implementation and our reporting practices. Okay, and I think we've seen this in a previous webinar, but what we want to get to, of course, through all these steps, we want to get to business impact. We want to provide a better end user experience for our users, for our website visitors, for our mobile app users, and we want to drive business impact, organizational impact. We have a dollar sign on the top. You could replace that dollar sign with any currency symbol, or we could even eliminate the currency symbol because it's about not necessarily even about a monetary impact. It's about an organizational impact, and it's about creating a better experience for our end users. So best practice number one, track non-important page views. And we saw this in a previous webinar. By default, Google Analytics will only track a page view. So we see that in the basic tracking code, GASEN page view. What that means is good news and bad news. Good news is that there is a lot of data that's tracked by default in Google Analytics. So if you take the tracking code that we saw previously and you plop that onto every page of your website, it's a little bit different for on the app end. On the app end, it's a little bit more of an active process from the get-go. But on the web end, it's actually very straightforward to, if we just jump back, to take this tracking code and to propagate it to every page of your website. You talk to your developer, or you're the developer yourself, take this code, you put it into a template, it goes onto every page of your website. As soon as that page loads, we get this GASEN page view function that executes, and it sends all this data into Google Analytics that populates the reports, the audience reports, the acquisition reports, the behavior reports, and so forth. So that's good news. But there's a lot of important user information that's not tracked at all. We saw this previously, that any interaction that does not cause a page to load is not tracked by default. And that's probably the single biggest gap in Google Analytics and installations on websites in particular. There are lots and lots of user interactions that just are not tracked by default. We see many examples on the desktop end, on the web end. We see examples as well, probably most notably at the top. If you see the telephone link, we have a US 800 number there, a toll-free number. If a mobile user were to click on that number, by default, it would not be tracked in Google Analytics because it is not causing a page to load. Now, is that an important user action when a user clicks a phone number to contact you, to contact your organization? Is that something that you want to know? Obviously, you do want to know when someone clicks a phone number to call you. That would not be tracked by default. So that's why we're talking about this gap in tracking first, because all of these types of user interactions are not tracked by default. And we address that through event tracking, and we aren't going to have a chance during the regular part of the webinar to talk about event tracking. If we have time during Q&A, we'll get into event tracking a little bit more, and we will also send out links to additional information for the topics that we're talking about today. But let's keep these gaps, all these tracking gaps, let's keep those in mind as probably our top implementation gap that we want to address. Also, another example is if you have a multi-step process. Notice there are 4 steps in this process, including the thank you page, but take a look at the 4 boxes here and see what is not changing. What is not changing here? www.mysite.com/same URL. The URL does not change. So this is another example. If you have a multi-step process, especially a multi-step purchase process or any process that is leading to an important action that you want to track as a goal, which we will be talking about, if the URL does not change, these steps are not tracked by default. So this would also have to be addressed either through events or even better through virtual page views. We'll send out more information on this topic, but be aware of these tracking gaps as probably the single biggest gap in Google Analytics implementation, and best practices to make sure that you are tracking these types of user interactions. Okay, big topic. We could spend a lot of time just on that, but since we have 7 or 8 additional things to talk about, we are going to move on to best practice number 2. And that is make sure that we have goals set up. I'm thinking that a lot of us on the webinar today already do have goals set up, which is great if you do. We can remember that we don't necessarily just want to have one goal set up. We want to track any important user interaction as a goal. So any kind of submission, it can't even be a threshold of engagement. If you're a publishing website, you could track the number of page views that occurred during a session. Now, when we talk about goals, of course, we're talking about tying specific user interactions to your KPIs. Now, KPIs stands for, if we're not familiar with this term, KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. So we want to make sure that we're tying our analytics to our organizational KPIs. What effort did we go through to make sure that our website visitors, our app users, are taking the actions that we designed them to take? So you want your goals to align with what's most important to you organizationally. And again, that could be big successes, or it can be smaller successes as well. If you are an e-commerce site, you could track your e-commerce conversions as, you could track your transactions as e-commerce conversions, or, I'm sorry, not or, and in addition to that, you could track something like a newsletter sign up as a smaller success as well. Where are the goal reports located? They're in the conversion section of the left navigation panel. So we see towards the bottom of the left navigation, we have the conversions section. And when we configure goals, you could say, well, if someone is reaching my thank you page, I'm already going to see that in the regular pages report. But when you have goals configured, it allows Google Analytics to isolate that specific action as a success. So if you have a site where you want people to take a test, as in this example, you could see that in this case, in 14.80% of the sessions, people took the action that you wanted them most to take. So the conversion rate, 14.80%. You also see the total number of completions, so 2,467. That means that in 2,467 sessions, people took the action that we wanted them most to take. And we also have, if we have a funnel that's defined, we also see abandonment rate, so the 72.07% of folks who entered the funnel did not reach the end of the funnel. So in isolating a specific action as a success, we're allowing Google Analytics to calculate additional metrics. Also, in defining a funnel, and again, we're not going through the funnel setup in today's session. If we have time at the end, and especially if it comes up during Q&A, we can quickly walk through the goal and funnel setup. But if you have set up a funnel, you can also measure drop-off from step to step to step. If we look at this funnel, if you look quickly at the drop-off points, you might see that there are two points in the funnel, especially one point and another point, that show significant drop-off. If you take a minute and scan the funnel, just try to see where this most significant drop-off is occurring. You might see that from the first step to the second step, there are only 37% of sessions in which people are proceeding from the demo to the sign up, and a little further down from the setup to launch, we're only 70% are proceeding there. So we're losing a significant percentage of folks who entered the conversion funnel and did not get towards the end. If you look all the way at the bottom, you see that there's a 24.19% conversion rate. So the funnel that we've defined, whatever the process is, this is a process for signing up to take a test. It could be a lead submission, it could be any kind of sign up, it could be any kind of process. We see that if you have a funnel that's configured, or if you have an e-commerce funnel that's configured, you can see how many people are entering your process and not getting to the end, and you can see the drop-off point from point to point that you have defined in your setup. So you see how powerful this is. You see where people are dropping off. You see that where you would need to optimize. So if you ideally want folks to go from step 1 to step 2, from demo to sign up, and only 37.57% of folks are doing that, that means you have an optimization opportunity on your demo page. You want to evaluate the page, possibly do usability testing, possibly do a split test, A/B testing. That's a whole other topic that we won't. That actually should be another best practice as well in the webinar, the A/B testing. But we don't have a chance to talk about that today. But you see where it's an opportunity for optimization with additional techniques such as usability testing, A/B testing. But we don't know this unless we set up a goal, unless we set up a funnel on top of that goal. And just remember, in general, this is a kind of another additional best practice. When you are communicating as an analyst, you want to remember to communicate in ways that are visual and ways that are also emotional as well. And that's one big benefit. If we just jump back to the funnel, that's a big benefit of the funnel, is that it is both a highly visual format, and it's a basic metaphor that everyone can relate to. Everyone understands the funnel metaphor. And it's also, once you have a funnel defined, if we jump back to the previous screenshot, the abandonment rate that we see over on the right, the 72.07% abandonment rate, actually is only provided if you have a goal, specifically with a funnel defined on top of it. So the abandonment rate is calculated only when you have a goal funnel. Now, abandonment is, basic, concrete, emotional term that everyone understands. So if you are working with other folks and you need to, potentially motivate other people in your organization to help you in the analysis efforts, if you need to purchase an A/B testing tool, or you need developer support to make changes, or you need a little bit of a budget for usability testing, just as some examples, you can demonstrate that we are losing 72.7% of the sessions in which people entered the funnel and did not get to our conversion point in the funnel. So again, we want to remember, just in general, in Google Analytics, we want to keep things as visual and emotional as possible when we're communicating. There's also different ways that we can display our table data in more visual format. If we have a chance during Q&A, maybe we could look at that as well. But just remember, as an analyst and as an optimizer, you also have an important role as a communicator. So for yourself and for others, communicate in ways that are more visual and more emotional. Also, as another quick note, when you're setting up a goal, or if you have e-commerce implemented, if you're setting up a goal, specify a goal value, or if you have e-commerce tracking implemented or enhanced e-commerce tracking implemented. Another benefit that you get is the calculation of page value. And you see in this case, page value represents the amount of support that a page is giving to a goal completion, or the amount of support that a page is giving to e-commerce transactions as well. So you could see which pages, not necessarily in a funnel, but just which pages elsewhere on your website, or if you're on a mobile app, it would be other screens, that are supporting your goal completions or your e-commerce transactions, in the sense that after people view the pages, at some point in the session, they are converting, they're completing the goal, or they're completing the e-commerce transaction. This is the formula. The formula is a little bit weird when you first see it, but the page value is calculated as the goal value or e-commerce value after the page view minus the total number of page views. So if we go total number of sessions in which the page was viewed. So if we just go back to the previous slide, what the page value means is that, for instance, in the row that's highlighted, the About Us, that means that on average, if this is an e-commerce site, on average, after that page was viewed, there was $111 of e-commerce revenue that was accrued. And again, you can fill in any currency that is most relevant to wherever your locale is. So that's About Us. If we look at another example, if we look at, let's say, review in row 8, $22.68 of page value. That means that on average, that page is only driving 1/5 of the e-commerce revenue or the goal value after it's seen. So another benefit that we get from goal tracking with a value or e-commerce tracking is that we can see other pages that are supporting the conversion process. So the page value metric is a little bit strange when you first approach it, but when you start to use it, you see how powerful it is in indicating which pages are really supporting conversions, which screens are really supporting conversions. So we want to make sure to consider page value as a metric as well, and we'll send out more information on that. Okay, let's move on to our third best practice, so using segments. So segments are used in reporting going forward. They're not part of your implementation, but they're part of your ongoing practice, your ongoing reporting practice. And segments are used to break your reporting down by specific characteristics, such as a specific location, all visitors from Saudi as an example, or different behaviors, everyone who views a certain page or takes a certain action. And it also can allow you to break your reporting down by your user constituency, so different types of users who are visiting your website or using your app. Okay, as an example, Airbnb. We don't have access to the Google Analytics for Airbnb. This is just an example. You go to Airbnb, it either will say list your space or become a host. That's one of the buttons that you can click on as soon as you come to the Airbnb website. Now, why is that so significant? Why do we want to really pay special attention to the people who click on become a host or list your space? We want to pay a special attention to that is because as soon as someone clicks that button, they are giving you an important signal. They are saying, I'm a potential host, I'm a potential lister, and that allows you to analyze all of their activity separately from people who do not click that button. So as soon as someone clicks list your space or become a host, they go to a page that has this URL, Airbnb/rooms/new. So as soon as a visitor hits that page, again, they have told you, I am a potential room lister, I'm a potential host, and therefore you should analyze my behavior differently from users who did not click list your space or become a host. Because those users who did not click list your space or become a host, who are they? What audience constituency are they? They're the people who are interested in actually renting out your room in wherever it may be that you have an extra room in your apartment in Abu Dhabi and you are renting it out for the weekend. That's one audience constituency. The other audience constituency is the person who might be interested in staying at your apartment in Abu Dhabi. There's very different audience segments, very, very different motivations, and therefore you don't want to analyze them together. Aggregation is the enemy. Segmentation is what is going to allow us to analyze our data in a more meaningful way and get to insight and get to reach conclusions that allow us to take action. So just as an example, this is how we would define our segment, and if we have time during Q&A, we'll walk through the segment creation process. We would define our segment so we're back at our room listers segment. We're back on all of the folks who clicked list your space and they ended up on this page, airbnb.com/rooms/new. So how are we going to define a segment for all of those users who click through to that page? We can go to the new segment screen, the new segment panel, and all we have to define is sessions that include the page rooms new. So all sessions that include that page indicate that this session, that this visitor is potentially interested in listing their room, is potentially interested in becoming a host. So this one behavior is enough for us to segment out those users as their own constituency, as their own subgroup of our visitors. Now, why is that important? Because when we define that segment and we go back to our conversion report, I want everyone to take a look for a second, see what's going on here, because we're demonstrating a couple of really, really important best practices in this one screen here. So we're on our goal overview page and we're showing goal completions for list a room. So become a host. So these are the people who are this is the action of listing your room. Okay, I have my apartment in Abu Dhabi and I'm listing a room that I want to, in my apartment, that I want to send out there. Now, if we were to look at the conversion rate for all sessions for everyone who's going to Airbnb, look at that top figure. We see in the metrics on the bottom. Everything in the top row is for all sessions, and everything in the bottom row, you see room listers or potential room listers. That is all of the same metrics segmented out just for the folks who click through to this page. So let's just back up and make sure we understand what's going on here. So we created a segment for everyone who clicked this list your space button. When they did that, they went to this page. So we knew that everyone who hit this page was potentially interested in becoming a host and listing their room. So we defined a segment based on all sessions in which this page was viewed. So now we have a segment for our potential listers, for our potential hosts. Once that segment was created, we applied it to our goal overview report. Now, this is where the rubber really meets the road. Because if we look at the conversion rate, the list a room conversion rate, which is only relevant for the host, the list a room conversion rate is not relevant for the person who's looking to rent your room out, the person who's traveling and wants to stay in your apartment in Abu Dhabi. This is only relevant for you in Abu Dhabi who wants to rent your room out. Now look at the conversion rate for all sessions. It's only 8.22%. These numbers are, again, these are fictitious. We don't have access to the Google Analytics for Airbnb, and if we did, we wouldn't be sharing it. We don't share client data. But the point here is that the conversion rate for all sessions, that aggregate, everyone who's visiting the website, is 8.22%, whereas within the segment that we've defined, since we've narrowed our focus, the conversion rate is 4.62%. And also, if you notice, the trend on the top, and I'm sorry, you know what? I realize that the color should be inverted on the top. We should have the blue line is room listers, and the orange line is the all sessions. But you see the point that the trend line for the room listers, if the room listers were the blue line on the top, the trend line for conversion rate is much more amplified. So that's another important aspect of segmentation, is that it amplifies trends. So if you were to just, let's say that the orange line is all sessions and the blue line up on top, up in the big main reporting graph, the blue line is the room listers, you could see trends in a much more pronounced way than if you were just to look at all sessions. So something that may look like a pretty insignificant trend if we're looking at the orange line on top looks much, much more significant when we're looking at our data within the relevant context. And in our case, the relevant context for list a room is only people who are potentially interested in listing a room. And again, we know that by people who are clicking through to this page. So once people get to this page, we know that those are the people who may list their room, and we're doing our analysis. We created a segment, and we're doing our analysis within that segment. So that's a really important best practice, is that we want to segment our audience down into meaningful groups, and we want to tie these segments to our constituencies. Okay, and again, if we have a chance during Q&A, there are resources for setting up segments, but if we have a chance during Q&A, especially if folks are interested, we can walk through the goal, I'm sorry, not the goal setup process, we can do that too, but we can walk through the segment setup process. Okay, multiple views for property, per property. And when you're in Google Analytics, there's of course the account level of the hierarchy. Way over to the right, there's the property level, and there's the view level. Now we see that in the middle column, property, we see tracking info as the third selection down, and that is where we would access our tracking code that we saw earlier in the session, is that is where all the data flows into Google Analytics. So if all the data is flowing into Google Analytics at the property level in the middle, why do we need more than one view on the right? Why do we need more than one way to deal with that raw property feed that's coming in at the middle? So if we imagine the raw data coming in right down the middle into property, if we go over to the right, why do we need more than one way to represent that data? Why do we need different views? Well, we need different views because for all of us who deal with data, we know that there's some data cleanup that we need to perform on the data that's coming in. It's one basic example of the cleanup. We normally want to exclude our own organization's traffic to our own websites. That's just basic housekeeping that we could do. Another form of housekeeping is that we can lowercase our search terms, or we can lowercase our campaign parameters. So that's one type of housekeeping that we can perform on the data that's coming in at the property level. Another even more significant way that we can alter the raw data that's coming in is we can create subsets of our data. So if you want to focus your data on a specific geography or a specific traffic source or a specific device type, you can create hard-coded subsets of the data, and that is why we would want to create multiple views, and that is why the view functionality exists. And that is why we can take the raw data that's coming in at the property level and we can create multiple views of that data. Here's another representation of the view functionality. So if we have the Google Analytics website tracking code, or this could be mobile app mobile app, not the tracking code. It would be either Google Tag Manager or one of the SDKs feeding into the Google Analytics property way up on top. And we have, in this case, if you look at, go ahead and look, take a minute and look at the diagram and see which of these filters and settings are doing housekeeping, so to speak, on the data, and which of these filters and settings are actually more hard coding the data down into subsets. If you take a moment and look, you see that URL consolidation is more housekeeping. If you go further down, you see that the blue box, we have view setting, goal configures, goals configured. So goal configuration is another way that we can alter the raw data that's coming in to Google Analytics. If we see view filter Europe traffic only in the fourth column, so that is a way that we're creating a hard-coded data subset. Go all the way over to the right, the purple box, the purple filter, we see that we are filtering our data down just for a tablet. So these are different ways that we can view the same raw data that's coming into Google Analytics. Now, it's important to be aware of this functionality. It's important to take advantage of the functionality, and we can talk a lot about different ways that we can alter the raw data that's coming into Google Analytics, and it's completely configurable. You can change any value. You can uppercase, you can lowercase, you can subset the data. But going back to the basic best practice, you have to remember that sometimes you can mess up your filters. You could have problems with your filters. You could have problems with your settings. So you don't want to go into your one view and start applying settings or filters, because this is what could happen. This actually happened to someone who was in one of our actual live training sessions. Actually told me that he had applied this is an IP address filter. So this was a filter to remove all of the company's internal data. So all of the company's internal traffic from Google Analytics, and he applied a filter that looked like this. Now I want you to take 10 seconds and look at this filter that he applied, and I want you to tell me why this was his reaction when he realized what he had done. Just take a minute and look at that screenshot. He had inadvertently only included all of his internal company data by IP address. This means that he knocked out all of the actual external visitor data from their Google Analytics. Now, fortunately, he realized his error in only about 8 hours. So he only lost about 8 hours of data. But imagine if this had gone on for 8 days or potentially even longer. That would not be a good scene. So what we want to make sure to do in Google Analytics is to, at a basic level, maintain 3 views. Maintain a raw view to which we apply no settings or filters. Maintain a test view where we test out our settings and filters, and maintain one or more working views where we are applying our filters and our settings. And again, this is another topic. We easily spend an hour just talking about view settings and view filters. Important takeaway from this best practice, just remember, if you're not familiar with the view functionality, we could take the same raw data that's coming into Google Analytics and create different representations of the data, either by applying housekeeping settings, cleaning up the data, or also by more significantly subsetting the data. But before you do that, make sure that you have at least 3 different views, that you've created 3 different views. One that's raw, unfiltered, you don't touch it at all, one test view, and one or more working view. As another geographical example at the bottom, all visitors from Mexico and Canada. It could be any geography that you set up. Okay, moving on to best practice number 5, which actually relates to the previous best practice, which is the housekeeping best practice. Consolidate URLs. Now, this is a problem that I see in Google Analytics implementations that are otherwise done correctly, your URL consolidation. If you go into your pages report in Google Analytics, and this is something that you can do now, or you can do right after the webinar. If you go into your main pages report and you see the number of pages, how many pages do we have here? We know how many different pages are being recorded in Google Analytics because it would show up as the number of rows at the bottom of the pages table. In this case, we have 22,318 different rows. Now, are there 22,000 pages, different physical pages, different experiences that our end users are experiencing? Of course not. Well, I should say of course not. In this case, there aren't. You may have a website, especially a content website, where you have 22,000 different pages. But in this case, this 22,000 pages represents fragmentation of the URLs. It's the same URL representing the same. It's different URLs representing the same page. And I've seen cases where there are 400,000, 500,000 different URLs because the URLs are fragmented. Now, if we go back, you see what could be causing fragmentation. If you have URL parameters like row2, WO equals TR, when you start getting into parameters that can be used for programmatic purposes, for session tracking and so forth, but do not dictate different page content, it's that, look at the row2, WO equals TR. Those are the types of things, those are the query parameters. Those are typically what fragment your URLs. So how you can consolidate your URLs is, first of all, you would want to speak with your developers, and you would also want to you know what, we also want to, let's just jump out for a second. Another thing that we would want to do to know where to begin to consolidate our URLs is to, this is another best practice, is that we would want to make sure that we have access to Google Search Console, formerly called Google Webmaster Tools. So we're taking a little bit of a detour, and we're going to google.com/webmasters. Oops. Sorry, let me just going to sign in a different account. Okay. If you don't have access to Google Search Console, it's an important additional set of reports that you want to have access to in addition to Google Analytics. One report that Google Search Console will provide is if you go to crawl and you go to URL parameters. This will give an indication of the URL parameters that may be causing fragmentation. Now, Google Search Console only pertains to the Google search engine, your Google search results, but the same principles of URL fragmentation apply in search engine for Google search and for analytics. So this is where you can get an idea of which parameters may be fragmenting your URLs. When you see representative URL, that means that that query parameter is fragmenting your URL. And this is getting a little bit technical, but if you work with your developer and you showed them this report, they would understand exactly where this was going, and they would be able to help you consolidate your URLs. So once you have this information and you've worked with your developer, how can you consolidate the URLs in your view settings for whichever Google Analytics view you're in? You would add those parameters to exclude URL query parameters. And just by including these query parameters, if we go back, we remember that we had 22,000. I want you to just take a guess at how many URLs we have consolidated after we have excluded the URL query parameter. So we've gone from 22,000. I want you to make a guess just in your mind. How many URLs did we consolidate down to? 59. This is not this is an actual use case. We took 22,000 URLs and we consolidated them down into 59. So we didn't lose any data when we say exclude URL query parameters. We're actually just consolidating our data. We're not excluding anything. So we're not excluding anything in terms of excluding data. We're consolidating our data down. So we went from 22,000 different URL variations to 59. Is it easier to analyze 59 URLs than 22,000? Yes. So make sure to check out your pages report. If you see 500,000 different URL variations, you need to consolidate them down, unless you happen to have 500,000 actual different end user pages on your site, which can happen, but in more cases than not, when you have many thousands of different URL variations, it means that your URLs are fragmented and you need to consolidate them. Okay, campaign parameters for better attribution. A lot of our acquisition data in Google Analytics is too general or is not specific enough. And this is due largely from the fact that if there is not a previous referring website, Google Analytics classifies the traffic as direct. So just as a quick fill-in exercise, so these different types of traffic, email that you send out could show up as direct in Google Analytics. If someone clicks through from Microsoft Outlook or Macintosh Mail and there's not a previous referrer, traffic will show up as direct. It could actually also show up as, let's say, direct or referral. On this one, a banner ad would just show up as referral, which is not so much of a problem, but it's going to get lost in the referrals report. Pay-per-click by default, if you don't have campaign parameters or auto tagging, would show up as organic traffic. So if you're running Google AdWords, you want to make sure to enable auto tagging. So Google Analytics will recognize the traffic as paid. Now this is really surprising too. If someone clicks through from a Twitter app or Facebook app, that's not going to show up in Google Analytics as social by default. That would also show up as direct, because again, there's no previous website that Google has to work with as the referral. All it sees is that that your website opened. There was no previous web page, so that traffic's going to show up as direct. Affiliate would show up as referral. PDF would also show up as direct. Any kind of app click-through, if you're passing off from your own app to your website, that's also going to show up as direct. By default, press release would show up as referral. So you'd have to fish out all your press release pickups. All of those would just be mushed in with all of your other referrals. So we want to make sure to apply campaign parameters in all of these different situations. This is another topic that we could certainly talk about for a long time. It's a really important topic. We're going over it very quickly because we don't have a lot of time left, but you want to make sure in all these situations to campaign tag your inbound links. We have resources about this on the eNOR blog. If you're not familiar with this concept and you're responsible for generating traffic, you have to get very aware of this topic. Campaign parameters are really important in clarifying our acquisition data. So you can use a URL builder. You can search for eNOR URL builder. You add additional information to your URLs. You get a campaigns report where all your specific campaigns are broken out, and you could view that campaign report by medium or by campaign. As in this screenshot, we could change the primary dimension to source, so we're seeing the data by source. You see in this example, we have cheetah and cheetah male broken out, which is not good because we want to consolidate. Same way we wanted to consolidate our URLs, we want to consolidate our source value, so you have to be consistent with your campaign parameters. And by medium value as well, we can go up and down the hierarchy. So again, we could spend a lot of time talking about campaign parameters. We certainly spend more time than this in the live training session because it's a super important topic, but we want to make sure that if you're not aware of the need of campaign parameters, that's for step one, and make sure you get informed on the mechanics of the campaign tracking. There are plenty of information resources on that, including on our own Enor blog. You can use them with short links, QR codes. Don't use campaign parameters for internal linking. Remember not to do that. It starts a new session and it breaks your attribution. So don't use campaign parameters for internal linking. Okay, best practice number 7, use the multi-channel funnel reports for conversion analysis. This is related to our goals. In most Google Analytics reports, it's the most recent click that gets all of the credit for any action that goes on. But if you think that there are additional sessions that are supporting your conversion, you've paid for a Google AdWords click-through, and then someone comes back tomorrow through Google organic search and then converts, you want to make sure to give Google AdWords credit for that conversion as well, because it helped to assist the conversion. So in this case, in this example, we see in the multi-channel funnel reports, we see that there were 142 conversions in which the first session was due to paid search and the returning session was due to organic search. So you want to do a lot of your conversion analysis in the multi-channel funnel report section of Google Analytics, because it gives you a perspective on assisting channels. So you paid for 142 click-throughs. They didn't convert today, but they came back tomorrow through a Google organic search and they converted. So you want to make sure to give paid search credit for some of those conversions, especially if you're the one responsible for that budget. Additional best practice, use Google Tag Manager to deploy your code, or if you're not using Tag Manager, another tag management system, but use Tag Manager to deploy your code instead of natively. This is obviously a whole other topic, but we couldn't talk about best practices without talking about Google Tag Manager as well. So a quick review, make sure that you use events or virtual pagey tracking to fill in all of the tracking gaps, all the actions that are not tracked by default. Make sure that you configure goals and or e-commerce. If you configure enhanced e-commerce, or if you configure a goal with a funnel, you will also get that funnel perspective. Make sure that you use segments for most of your analysis. If we go back to Airbnb, we remember that we were able to isolate trends much more easily by creating segments that map to our customer constituencies. Make sure to maintain an unfiltered view, a test view, and additional working views, at least 3 views per property. Consolidate URLs if it's necessary. It's not always necessary, but when it is a problem, the fragmentation is a problem, it tends to be a big problem. Use campaign parameters for sure for wherever it's needed in your inbound traffic, not for just regular links. You don't need it for just a regular link from any website, but for all those other situations that we looked at, we want campaign parameters. Use the multi-channel funnel reports for most of your conversion analysis to make sure that assisting channels are getting credit as well. And remember, if we follow these best practices, we'll get into that 3%, or it's actually even probably smaller than that, of people who are people in organizations who are actually using Google Analytics in a way that can be effective, the way that it really can be used to drive insight and improvement. Okay, so we have our upcoming webinar on February 8th and another one on February 2nd. The event tracking that we looked at earlier, we're going to talk about in great detail on February 8th and February 22nd, is an additional, more advanced topic for cross-domain tracking, cross-device tracking, and CRM integration. So make sure to visit us again, Power Webinar Series. Thank you for attending. I'm going to turn it over to Abdullah now. Do we have any questions, Abdullah?
Thank you very much, Eric. At this time, we would like to open the discussion for any questions and answers. If you do have any question, please raise your hand and I'll grant you the microphone. Eric, we do have one question about configuring dynamic IPs. In other words, how do you filter dynamic IP addresses?
That's a great question, and the answer is that there's no easy solution for that. What you could do for it, well, if we're talking about dynamic IP addresses within an IP address range, that is not a problem. If it's dynamic but within a range, what you can do, and if we go over to, this is an opportunity for me to talk about this tool that I developed, regexip.com. It's actually not super fancy, but what this allows you to do is to take an IP address range. So if you go to your network administrators and you say, what IP address range are we using to access the internet from this location? And they tell you, well, it's, as we see in the example here, 162.78.253.1 to 15. So let's say it's, as another example, let's say it's 34.23.198.1 to 18. You go ahead and generate a regular expression, generate one regular expression. Take this one regular expression, which would correspond to all of the IP addresses within that range, and then you would go into, let's bring up our, let me just access it here. Go into Google Analytics. You go into your test view. You wouldn't want to do this in a working view. You go into your test view, go to admin, filter, add filter, let's say exclude, IP addresses, custom select field, so we're excluding IP address and our range. So if it's dynamic within the range, then a regular IP address filter like this would work. I'm thinking that was not the question. That was a little bit of a detour. That the question was truly a dynamic IP address like you would get at, let's say, at home. If you're logging into if you're logging in from home and your ISP assigns you different IP addresses. There's no easy way to deal with that. One thing that you could do is you could set up a page. Let's say that you have 100 people in your company who are all accessing the internet from home. You could have them go to a certain page on your website. This is kind of a clunky solution, but this is how you'd have to do it. You could have everyone go to a specific page on your website that's designed to write a user scope custom dimension to their browser. So if they are using that browser and they use that browser going forward, and you have set a user scope custom dimension, then you could filter out, instead of filtering out by IP address, you could filter out by whatever custom dimension you specified. So if you call the custom dimension home user or whatever it is, however you set up the custom dimension, that's how you could exclude the internal traffic, but that would depend on everyone visiting that page at least once, and that would depend on the cookies not being cleared out, people not using different devices or different browsers. If it sounds like a pain in the neck, it is. And that's why the short answer is there's no real easy way to filter out dynamic IP addresses. So I hope that answers that question, and I wish I had better, easier news as far as that goes.
Thank you, Eric. We'll take 2 more questions. And if we don't get a chance to take all your questions, please, again, email me, Abdullah@enur, or training@enur, and we'll try to address your questions. Eric, another question is entering through the visualization funnel, or let's say you have a multi-step process. The users can enter through the visualization through the funnel through multiple, I guess, steps or different steps. Like, for example, I can come through step number 3 or step number 2, and also people may skip steps as well. Can Google Analytics still help here with tracking these?
That's a super question. I'm just backing up to our funnel visualization. That's a great question. The answer is yes, and the answer is that this funnel that we're looking at now was configured for the first step to be required in the funnel. So we didn't get a chance to look at this during the regular training, but very quickly, if we were to set up a goal funnel. So let's say we're setting up a new goal for our, let's say it's a newsletter sign up. So we have a main newsletter page, and then we have a newsletter form, and we have, let's consider another example. Let's do something that's a little bit more complicated, a multi-step process for, let's say it's an application for a training program for a medical assistant, and it's a 6-step process. So we want people to get to, let's just call it medical assistant destination. Let's say it's our thank you screen is the destination. So this is basic goal setup. I'm sorry I'm going through this very quickly. This is the basic goal setup that we're looking at. Now when we define a funnel on top of this goal, if we go ahead and click funnel, notice that the first step has required or no. Now by default, the first funnel step actually is not required, which means that Google Analytics would show, sorry, I have thanks you here. Let me just correct that. This would mean that by default, with the first step required, Google Analytics would actually show entries at all steps in the funnel. If you click required yes, as we did in our funnel example, Google Analytics would only show entries at the first step of the funnel. Now you could create, it's perfectly fine to create 2 different funnels going to the same goal. If you want to see entries only at the top, and you want to be able to see entries also at other steps in the funnel, you can create 2 different funnel steps that are pointing to the same goal. And what's important to remember about funnels, and this is a little bit counterintuitive, is that the funnel does not affect the conversion rate at all. Conversion rate is completely independent of the funnel. So regardless of which users do and do not go through your funnel, this metric that we see here, the 14.80%, means that regardless of how people entered, regardless of how people got to that goal page, that is the percentage of sessions in which users did get to that goal page. Now what the funnel visualization will affect will be the funnel conversion rate at the bottom of the funnel. That would be different depending on first step or not configured. Also the abandonment rate and that 72%, that would be influenced by the different funnel configurations as well. So if you had identical funnels, first step required, first step not required, the abandonment rate would vary based on the funnel. So you can, as mentioned, it's a great question, and you could certainly set up, you could decide, do you want first step required or first step not required, or you actually don't even have to make the decision, because you could see both representations, which may be good for a longer process. So I hope that answers that question. And just as a quick note on funnels, let me just go to a view where funnels are enabled. Let me just hop over. If you have a goal that's already configured but you don't have a funnel that's configured, you can, if you go to in the conversion section, so we're down in conversions, goals. I'm just going to go ahead and change the time setting. If you click the reverse goal path report, so we're in conversions goals, reverse goal path report, this can give you an idea of you can read this report kind of from right to left. So these are previous step 3, previous to step 2, previous step 1, and the goal completion. This can give you an idea of the funnels that you should set up, because even though you see the number of conversions that took place through these previous step 1, 2, and 3, you don't know what the level of drop-off is from one step to the next. So if you already do have goals set up, but you don't have a funnel set up for that goal, go ahead and check out your reverse goal path report, and that will give you an idea of where to start to map a funnel. However, I think a lot of us, when we have a conversion point, we kind of know the pages that are supposed to lead to the conversion. So, we may have a funnel set up already. It's still useful, though, to look at the reverse goal path report to see how people are actually getting to our goal pages. So I hope that helps on that question.
All right, thank you, Eric. At this point, this concludes all the questions sessions. The session was recorded, and our marketing department will follow up with the recording information where you can play it. I'd like to thank everybody for coming in, and hopefully we can see you all again in the next webinar. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Abdullah, and thank you everyone for joining, and hope to see you again, and please let us know if you have any questions.